The world was blue, then green, then black. Liam's last memory was of the yacht's deck tilting at an impossible angle. He remembered Chloe's scream, a sound swallowed by the roar of the rogue wave. He remembered the splintering crash of the mast, and then the cold, violent embrace of the Pacific Ocean. He woke up coughing, salt water and sand scraping his throat raw. He was on a beach. A crescent of white sand curved before him, backed by a wall of impenetrable green jungle. The sun was a merciless hammer in a sky of perfect, indifferent blue. He pushed himself up. His body was a symphony of pain. A deep gash on his forehead was sticky with drying blood. His ribs ached with every breath. He scanned the shoreline, his heart a cold, frantic bird in his chest. "Chloe!" he yelled, his voice a hoarse croak. He saw her then, a small, crumpled form 50 yards down the beach, half in and half out of the surf. He stumbled towards her, his legs clumsy and weak. She was unconscious, her face pale, a dark bruise blooming on her temple. But she was breathing. He dragged her further up the sand, away from the lapping waves. He collapsed beside her, his relief so profound it felt like another injury. They were alive, they were together. That was all that mattered, for now. The island was a postcard from hell, beautiful and deadly. The jungle was a dense, tangled mass of vines and trees he didn't recognize. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic crash of waves and the cry of strange, unseen birds. They had nothing. The yacht was gone, claimed by the storm. They had only the clothes on their backs. Swim trunks for him, a bikini for her. As Chloe slowly regained consciousness, the reality of their situation began to set in. They were stranded, lost. Liam, ever the planner, the protector, took charge. "We need 3 things," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Water, shelter, and fire." He was a real estate developer from Los Angeles. He conquered boardrooms, not jungles. But he had watched enough survival shows to know the basics. Their love was their shield. They clung to each other, their shared warmth a defense against the encroaching fear. He found a stream of fresh water trickling from the rocks at one end of the beach. The water was clear and cold. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. They built a crude shelter from palm fronds and driftwood, a fragile barrier against the unknown terrors of the night. Fire was the hardest part. Liam spent hours trying to create a spark with 2 sticks, his hands quickly becoming raw and blistered. Failure gnawed at him. He was supposed to be the one who could fix things. Chloe, an artist with a gentle spirit, watched him, her eyes full of a trust he felt he didn't deserve. As darkness fell on their first night, they huddled together in their makeshift lean-to, cold and afraid. The jungle came alive with new sounds, chittering, rustling, and a low, deep growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. They held each other tight, their love the only light in a world of suffocating darkness. "We'll be okay," Liam whispered, more to convince himself than her. "As long as we have each other." Chloe nodded, burying her face in his chest. But in the back of Liam's mind, a small, cold seed of doubt had been planted. He had failed their first test. He had failed to make fire. Hope is a fragile currency on a deserted island. It dwindles with each passing sunrise that reveals an empty horizon. For the first few days, they survived on a diet of raw coconuts and a desperate optimism. They scanned the sea constantly, searching for a boat, a plane, any sign of rescue. There was nothing. The empty blue expanse mocked them. The island began to wear them down, not just physically, but mentally. The constant gnawing hunger was a physical pain, a dull ache in their stomachs that never went away. Thirst was a dry, scratchy demon in their throats. Their skin, once tan and healthy, became sunburned and blistered. Small cuts from coral and sharp rocks refused to heal in the humid air, becoming angry red sores. The cracks began to appear in their relationship. The roles they had played in their civilized life, the strong protector and the gentle muse, started to crumble under the brutal reality of survival. Their first fight was over a fish. Liam had managed to spear a small silver fish with a sharpened stick. It was a pathetic prize, but it was protein. As he was trying to clean it with a sharp shell, it slipped from his grasp and was washed away by a wave. Chloe, weak with hunger, burst into tears. "How could you be so careless?" she sobbed. "I wasn't careless!" Liam snapped back, his frustration boiling over. "It was an accident! You think this is easy?" The words were sharp and cruel. They hung in the air between them, more damaging than any physical blow. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not love, not trust, but disappointment. The island was stripping them bare, peeling back the layers of politeness and affection to reveal the raw, selfish creatures beneath. A few days later, disaster struck. While searching for more coconuts, Chloe slipped on a mossy rock and fell hard. A sharp cracking sound echoed through the jungle. Her ankle was broken. The pain was immense, but it was the fear in her eyes that terrified Liam. She was incapacitated. A liability. A cold, reptilian thought slithered into Liam's mind, a thought so monstrous he immediately pushed it away. She will slow me down. He banished the thought, ashamed and horrified. He fashioned a crude splint for her ankle and half-carried, half-dragged her back to the shelter. He was her caretaker now, her nurse. But the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer his partner. She was his burden. The seed of doubt planted on that first night began to sprout, its ugly roots twisting around his heart. He would look at her, lying helpless in the shelter, and he would feel a surge of love and pity. But sometimes, when the hunger was at its worst, he would look at her and feel something else, a cold, terrifying resentment. And then he would look at her body, not with desire, but with a different kind of appraisal. The detached, calculating gaze of a predator. He was starving, and she was made of meat. The line between man and beast is drawn in sand. Hunger and desperation can wash it away with the tide. Liam's mind was becoming a hostile landscape, his thoughts twisted by starvation and the insidious whispers of the island. He no longer saw Chloe as the woman he loved. He saw her as a collection of parts. Skin, muscle, bone. He started to rationalize. A dark, survivalist logic took hold. She is dying anyway. The voice in his head whispered, her ankle is infected. The fever is getting worse. It would be a mercy to her, and a necessity for me. One of us has to survive. He would go out foraging, his mind a battleground. He would find a few berries, a handful of edible roots, and he would face a terrible choice. He found a bird's nest once with 3 small speckled eggs inside. A treasure. He knew he should take them back to Chloe. She needed the strength, but the gnawing emptiness in his own stomach was a screaming tyrant. He broke the eggs into his mouth, swallowing the raw, slimy contents in a frantic, guilty rush. He buried the shells, hiding the evidence of his betrayal. When he returned to the shelter, Chloe looked at him. Her eyes, clouded with fever, were still sharp. She may have seen a fleck of yolk on his lip, or perhaps she just sensed the lie in his soul. She didn't say a word. She just turned her face away. The silence was his condemnation. The last thread of trust between them had snapped. The fever took hold of Chloe completely. She was delirious, her body racked with shivers. She would cry out for her mother, for water, for him, but it was a different him she was calling for. The Liam from their old life, the one who brought her coffee in bed, not the gaunt, wild-eyed creature who was now her jailer. He cared for her, but his actions were mechanical. He bathed her forehead with cool water. He forced sips of water between her cracked lips, but his touch was no longer tender. It was the touch of a rancher tending to his livestock before the slaughter. The island itself seemed to conspire with the darkness in his mind. The jungle sounds at night were no longer just frightening, they sounded like encouragement. The growl of some unseen predator sounded like approval. The constant rhythmic crash of the waves sounded like a countdown. One night he sat by the dying embers of his fire, a fire he had finally, miraculously managed to create. He looked at Chloe's sleeping form. She was so thin. Her breath was a shallow, ragged whisper. The reptilian voice in his head was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. It is time. She is weak. You are starving. This is not murder. This is survival. This is the law of the jungle. Eat or be eaten. He picked up a heavy, sharp-edged rock. It felt right in his hand. It felt like a tool. He stood over her, the rock raised. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, the fever seemed to clear. She looked at him. She saw the rock. She saw the intent in his eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, and she whispered his name, Liam. It was not an accusation. It was a question, a heartbreaking final question. What have you become? The rock in his hand felt impossibly heavy. Chloe's whisper of his name was not a shield, but a spear. It pierced through the fog of his hunger and struck something deep inside him, the man he used to be. For a long, silent moment, the two Liams battled for control, the starving beast and the loving husband. He saw her face, not as a collection of parts, but as the face he had woken up to every morning for 5 years. He saw the trust she had placed in him, a trust he was about to shatter with a piece of stone. He dropped the rock. It landed on the sand with a soft thud. He fell to his knees, his body shaking with a violent, soul-deep sob. He was a monster. The island hadn't made him one. It had only revealed the monster that was hiding inside him all along. He crawled back to her side and held her hand. It was cold. "I'm sorry, Chloe," he wept. "I'm so sorry." He spent the rest of the night in a state of feverish self-loathing. He had crossed a line in his mind and there was no going back. He knew he couldn't stay on the island, not with her, not with the beast that lived inside him. He had to leave. He had to try to find help. It was a suicide mission, but it was better than the slow moral rot of staying. At dawn, he made his decision. He would build a raft. A small, pathetic raft of logs and vines. He would take their chances with the open ocean. It was a fool's hope, but it was the only hope they had left. He worked with a frantic energy he hadn't felt in weeks. He gathered driftwood, tied logs together with tough, fibrous vines. Chloe watched him, her eyes lucid for the first time in days. She didn't ask what he was doing. She knew. It took him 2 days to build the raft. It was a clumsy, fragile thing, a testament to his desperation. He stocked it with their last few coconuts. He gently carried Chloe from the shelter and placed her on the logs. She was as light as a child. He pushed the raft into the surf. The waves crashed against it, threatening to tear it apart. He climbed aboard and began to paddle with a piece of driftwood. He didn't look back at the island. He didn't want to see the place that had almost destroyed his soul. They were at the mercy of the ocean now, a vast, indifferent wilderness of water. The first day was a blur of sun and salt. The raft drifted aimlessly. Liam paddled until his arms were numb, his shoulders screaming in protest. Chloe drifted in and out of consciousness. The sun beat down on them, blistering their skin. Thirst was a constant torment. By the second day, Liam was delirious. The horizon was a shimmering, wavering line. He saw ships that weren't there. He heard voices on the wind. The ocean was a vast, empty coffin. He was ready to give up, to let the sea take them. He slumped over on the raft, his energy gone. He had failed. He had failed her in every way a man could fail a woman. He closed his eyes, waiting for the end. "Liam." Her voice was a faint whisper. He opened his eyes. She was looking at him. Her fever had broken. Her eyes were clear. "Look," she said, her voice barely audible. He turned his head, his neck stiff. He followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing. Just the endless blue. Then he saw it, a dark shape on the horizon. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. It was a boat. A small fishing trawler. Hope, fierce and blinding, surged through him. He found a strength he didn't know he possessed. He stood up on the wobbly raft, waving his arms, screaming with a voice he didn't recognize. "Here, we're here!" The rescue was a blur of voices, strange faces, and the blessed, miraculous taste of fresh water. The crew of the fishing trawler, a group of weathered Indonesian men, treated them with a gentle kindness that made Liam weep. They were taken to a small coastal hospital. They were skeletons covered in sores and burns, their bodies ravaged by starvation and infection. But they were alive. The physical healing was slow. The mental and emotional healing would take a lifetime. They didn't talk about the island, not at first. The memory was a raw, gaping wound. To touch it was to invite an agony they weren't ready to face. They lay in adjacent hospital beds, the silence between them filled with the things they couldn't say. The hunger, the rock, the betrayal. Liam would look at Chloe and the shame would wash over him in a hot, suffocating wave. He had been willing to kill her. To eat her. That fact was a permanent stain on his soul. How could she ever look at him again without seeing the monster? He expected her to leave, to walk away from the wreckage of their relationship as soon as she was strong enough. He deserved it. He waited for the words. For the accusation, for the final, inevitable goodbye. One afternoon, as the tropical rain beat a soft rhythm on the hospital roof, she finally spoke. "I saw it, you know," she said, her voice quiet. He didn't have to ask what she meant. "I saw the look in your eyes that night." He couldn't meet her gaze. He just stared at his hands, the hands that had held the rock. "I don't know who that person was, Chloe," he whispered. "That wasn't me." "Yes, it was," she said, and his heart sank. "It was you, Liam, and it was me. It was the part of us that wants to live, no matter the cost. The island didn't create it. It just showed it to us." He finally looked at her. There was no anger in her eyes, no fear, only a deep, profound sadness, and something else, understanding. "I had the same thoughts," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "When my ankle broke, when I knew I was a burden, I hated you for it. I wished you would just leave me. I wished you would die so I wouldn't have to feel guilty. We were just animals, Liam. Stripped bare." He realized then that she had seen the monster in herself too. They had both been to the edge of the abyss. They had both looked into the darkness inside their own hearts. They returned to their life in Los Angeles, but they were different people. The world seemed flimsy, unreal. The concerns of their old life, mortgage payments, dinner parties, career ambitions felt trivial, absurd. They were haunted by the memory of the sun and the salt and the hunger. They were strangers in their own home. Their friends didn't understand. They saw a miracle story of survival. They didn't see the scars that lay beneath the surface. Liam and Chloe were bound together not just by love, but by a shared trauma. They were the only two people in the world who knew the truth of what they had become on that island. Their relationship was not the same. The easy intimacy, the blind trust, was gone. It was replaced by something more fragile, more somber. It was a relationship forged in the crucible of a shared nightmare. There were nights when Liam would wake up in a cold sweat, the weight of the rock still in his hand. He would look at Chloe sleeping beside him, and he would have to leave the room, terrified of the beast that still slept within him. But there were other moments, moments of quiet grace, a shared look across a room, a gentle touch of her hand on his. In those moments he saw not just a survivor, but a partner, someone who had seen the absolute worst in him and had chosen to stay. Their love was no longer a perfect, sun-drenched romance. It was a scarred, battered thing, but it was real. It had been tested by the ultimate fire, and it had not been completely consumed. They had survived the island. Now they had to learn how to survive each other. It would be the longest, hardest journey of all.